Ted Baehr, you've just written a book entitled The Golden Age of Hollywood and Broadway that takes us into an era that many consider to be the height of entertainment in America. Why did you write this book?
Well, it's about my father. My father starred in 62 movies before World War II, and then after World War II, he starred on Broadway from 1946 to 86. He starred in Showboat the year I was born. So I've done about 77 books, actually, contributed to, helped, written, and I decided, why haven't I done a book about my father? And a reporter had taped all these sessions with him, so I decided to work on it, put it together, and then I wanted some criticism, so I sent it to John Wayne, scriptwriter, and she said, it's perfect, you can't change it. Then I sent it to Roma Downey, who you know. She said, it's perfect. So I had to find somebody who was going to be critical. My son was critical, but I didn't trust him as much as a good proofreader that I found. So we cleaned it up a lot.
You highlight stories of faith, family, and patriotism from that era. How were these values embedded into the entertainment industry at that time, and what's changed and why?
Well, during the golden age of Hollywood, which is really the period, and the golden age of Broadway, there are a lot of groups, to start off, that lobby Hollywood. I'm in Washington right now. I was just at a little coffee shop where all these lobbyists meet with congressmen, et cetera, because they don't want to go through security. There's about 1,200 lobbying groups in Hollywood. Planned Parenthood spends $100 million a year lobbying Hollywood. The GLAAD, Gay Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, spends more money. And years ago, we all got together at UCLA, and the head of CBS television said we were the most significant. But during the golden age of Hollywood, the most significant was the Catholic Film Office, the Jewish Film Office, and the Protestant Film Office. And they cleaned up movies from 1933 to 1966. And Hollywood wanted that because you reach a broader audience. When they left, when the Protestant Film Office shut down in 1965, you went from 44 million weekly attendance in theaters to 3 years later, 17 million, and it's never gone back again. And the head of Paramount Pictures said, don't shut down. There's going to be a race to the bottom. So as soon as they left, there was a race to the bottom. So my father was in that period where, you know, Yankee Doodle Dandy and Mr. Sergeant York and Mr. Smith went to Washington, and it was instead of Ted Baehr, and It Was a Wonderful Life, and the bells of St. Mary rang out, because they were trying to appeal to the whole American public. And then they moved away from that. They decided to become niche oriented.
Tell us about your dad. I know a little bit about him because you and I have been friends for so many years. In fact, if I can just put in a little plug about Charisma Magazine, you were on the cover of Charisma Magazine probably in the 80s, maybe the early 90s, but you were still located in Atlanta, as I recall. You since moved out to the Hollywood area. And but your dad's name was your name, Ted Baehr. But he went by Robert Allen and sometimes Tex Allen. So tell us about his career and kind of why he changed his name and all that kind of stuff.
Well, he got out of college, Dartmouth College, in 1929. And that was the Great Depression. Most people have forgotten the Great Depression, but it was worse than you could possibly imagine. The whole country was in terrible shape. And so he worked for a bank in 29 before the Depression, and they went bankrupt. And then he worked for Curtis Flying Service, and they went bankrupt. And he was going to join a bread line. And the first agent in Hollywood, or one of the big agents, John Robert Powers, saw him in New York, and he said, you're a good-looking guy. I'll get you a contract with Warner Brothers. So he became the starring lead in a Marx Brothers comedy, the guy who gets the girl. They called that the juvenile lead. But when he went to sign the contract for Warner Brothers, they had the name Robert Allen. He said, what kind of a name is Robert Allen? My name is Ted Baehr. They said, well, that's Jack Warner's best friend. But the fact of the matter is, the studios like John Wayne, that wasn't his name. They always gave you a name And truthfully, they owned that name, Steve. So studios owned you for many, many years until the Paramount Picture case in the late 40s. And they would lend him out to Columbia Pictures or lend him out to another studio, MGM, and he'd do movies there. But Warner Brothers was making the money. The stars weren't making the money because they owned your name, Robert Allen. He said he wished that they had kept his name, Ted Baehr, because he said, who could forget Teddy Bear?
You're right. There aren't too many people who have a name like yours.
Yeah. And I love it. I'm happy
So
about it.
tell us more about him and also about your mother, who is also an actress.
Yeah, my mother came from, her family was the first, her mother's family, the Joys and the Taylors. There's a big sign where they're having that terrible flooding, that they were the first two families to settle those two towns that are there and name those two towns. So she was a beautiful Texas girl. An agent signed her. She went to Hollywood. She became Florence Ziegfeld was a big producer. He called her the most beautiful woman in America. I think he wanted to date her, but he didn't. And she got juvenile lead parts like my father did. My father quickly became a star in his own series, a Texas Ranger series, the first Texas Ranger. And Chuck Norris is a friend. We gave him an award at one point for one of his Texas Ranger television shows. And so it was the first Texas Ranger giving Chuck Norris when he was the last Texas Ranger before this new guy. I don't even know the new guy, when it was clean and wholesome. And but he didn't want to be stuck in Westerns. He had been in the cavalry in World War One. He could ride and rope with the best of them. He was a very powerful athlete, and he wanted to get into real movies. And he won the box office award for a musical comedy. But I was just at Columbia Pictures. Sony Affirm is at Columbia Pictures, and you know Sony Affirm because they do a lot of Christian films. And at Columbia Pictures, I walk out, and there's a poster, The Awful Truth, for a movie he starred in. And before, there was a poster for another movie, Crime and Punishment. And on the third floor of the main administrative office is a picture of my father along with other stars, because he was one of the biggest stars. And people forget stars. Fame is fleeting. I taught at a school in Washington, D.C., where I'm now, a university, and and I'm going to meet the heads of that school tonight. Sorry. And and I asked the kids, I talked about John Wayne. They said, who's John Wayne? So fame is fleeting. Steve, they're going to forget my name overnight. But Teddy Bear may last a little longer.
Well, of course, because that's so much part of the culture. And, what you're saying is very true, but it's true for another discussion on another day. I want to get back to the film industry and your book, because I want people to buy the book. I want them to be intrigued to read the stories, and it's full of stories. So what were some of the most exciting stories that you uncovered, especially having to do with faith?
Well, you were so kind to give me this opportunity. The first 1,000 people, I'm going to give them a gift, as always, to help them. So if they buy the book now, it just was released on Amazon. It just got out. But a lot of the stories are stories of, you think you get into the industry and you think you've made it big. So Warner Brothers signed him for a contract, and the same thing they did all the time is they'd put you on hiatus. And so they had you under contract. They owned your name, and you couldn't do anything. And then they were paying you like 1/10. All these things happen. When I used to introduce a guy that at events that Ronald Reagan, when he was running for president, then when he was a president, I introduced him 3 times. And he was on the board of SAG with my father. And SAG got residuals for actors in 1960. Before that, you never got residuals. So you were working at scale, even if you were a superstar like my father. And when you're on Broadway, you were still working at scale. That only broke in the 60s, that actors actually changed and got to be more important. My father eventually came to Christ, and he became a really mighty man of God. and spirit-filled and loving and kind. He turned away from being a superstar to being a super grandfather and a loving actor in many, many different parts.
And so, of course, you tell these stories. In fact, in the book, you talk about storytelling. And I know you well enough to know that you talk about that. You analyze the storytelling in movies. Compare the storytelling that we see now with the storytelling during this golden era.
Well, what happened really you've got two groups now making movies. In the golden age, it was only the studios, and there were 9 studios. Now there are only 4. But movies, which most people, I was head of a department at Berkeley, most kids at Berkeley did not want to do this. Movies are very simple. They have a simple storyline. That's why comic books make the best movies. Alfred Hitchcock said that dime store novels made the best movies. He bought all these dime store novels. He kept the title and threw the rest away. But they're very simple. And 2 friends of mine, the Irwin brothers, said to me after the third movies, they said, "You've taught us that movies are very simple, but that's extremely hard. To make things simple and clear, you know, Steve, movies are for everybody. And when you start becoming muddled and going too many directions and putting too many plots, you lose the audience. And there are a lot of independent movies today that lose the audience and they just become too complex, and they don't need to. You can make them simple. So, for instance, there were 3 movies one year about Lincoln, and the movie that worked was Steven Spielberg, and it was only 4 days about Lincoln. So movies were simple. My father's Western movies, guess what? The good guy always got the bad guy, and he always got the girl. So this is not complex. Finding Nemo is about finding Nemo. And when you move away from clarity and simplicity, it's just like writing. You lose the audience.
So give us some examples of movies that you think are great and maybe movies that are not so great.
Well, I was speaking at USC. I teach at a lot of different highly intellectual schools. As I said, I was head of a department at Berkeley and head of a department. And students generally want to be more complex. But at USC, one student said to me, "Okay, you know, you're a Christian. What's your favorite movie?" And I gave an obscure title, Tree of Wooden Clogs, because it's an Italian movie that nobody's seen, but it won the Cannes Award. I said, "What's your favorite movie?" And he responded, "It's a Wonderful Life." So all these kids at USC Film School laughed because it says, but really, It's a Wonderful Life is my top movie on my top 100 list. And Frank Capra Jr. was a friend of mine. It's a very simple story. It's about a man who's lost faith in his life. He's confused. He's dejected. He even thinks about doing the unthinkable. And at the beginning of the movie, God tells you where it's going. He tells this angeling being, Clarence, I've got this friend, George Bailey, who's thinking about ending his life. I want you to go and save him. That's the movie. It's just to show George Bailey It's a Wonderful Life. And actually, the real protagonist is not just Clarence, but it's George Bailey's wife. So simplicity makes that movie great. And then there are just a lot of every one of my father's movie, Crime and Punishment, Love Me Forever. All of those are beautiful movies because they're movies that are very clear and easy to see. And of course, I mentioned Finding Nemo. I have a top 100 movies. If you want the list, I'll send them to you someday, or I'll give them to anybody who's watching who wants to know. Or you can just, pick up the book and read the book. And there are a lot of good movies in there.
And so before we move on, tell my viewers how they can email you or however they would contact you, a website maybe where they could get this list of movies.
Yeah. And in fact, if you want to order the book, go to the website because you get a free gift. It's movieguide.org, www.movieguide.org, MOVIEGUIDE, one word, .org. If you want to get in touch with me, you can get in touch with me through the website. Actually, I'm foolish enough that I answer almost all my emails. If I miss one, it's because I didn't see it, because I love people, and you do too. You're very good and kind and gracious to me. And on there, there's a little button to order the book and to get your free gift for the first 1,000 books. 1,000 books, Steve, you've done this before yourself, might turn into more than 1,000. So, that's a lot of books to sell in a brief period of time.
Well, in the book business, that's the name of the game. To sell books, I guess in movies, it's to sell tickets and get people in the theaters to watch. But I want to ask you something that one of my staff gave me as a question. Some people think that Hollywood has always been secular or anti-Christian. Your book seems to challenge that idea. Can you speak to the spiritual roots of the entertainment industry in the early days?
Well, I can. In the early days, in the very beginning, the man who invented Hollywood in the 1990s, the Lumiere brothers and others, they were making mainly passion plays. There were a lot of them that were Catholic. The co-owner of Vitagraph, which was the first big film company grinding out a lot of movies in the 1890s and early 1900s, was Christian. And they became the leading forces until the 1910s. Then the theater owners said, and a lot of movies were shown in churches. So there's a whole book called The Silence of God about how movies were shown in churches. Then that split away in the 1910s. And then these three men, Joseph Breen, Martin Quigley, Daniel Day Lord, came in and said to the movie industry, since you left the churches, you've lost your audience, we're going to help you get them back. And they helped him get them back. And then you went through a period. For instance, Cecil B. DeMille's father was a pastor, and his father used to read him a chapter of history and a chapter of the Old Testament, chapter of the New Testament every night. That's why he made 10 Commandments, King of Kings, Greatest Story Ever Told. Those movies were being made by Cecil B. DeMille because he was a strong Christian. And those movies, reached the millions. So the movies that have always reached a lot of people are faith-based movies.
And you've been one of the ones that have been banging that drum the whole time I've known you, the last couple of decades.
Are you overwhelmed? Are you bored by it? I hope you're not bored by it, because this is my calling.
Yeah, it is your calling. What kind of lessons can today's creatives, learn from this golden era, not only in movies, but also on Broadway?
Well, the interesting thing is we've seen a significant turnaround. When we started doing Movie Guide, and I'm sorry to get away from my father's book, but when we started in 85, there was only one movie with positive Christian content, Trip to Bountiful. And then we started showing the studios they could make more money by putting Christian content. David Putnam, who did Chariots of Fire, took over Columbia. I had him speak at the NRB. He said the biggest disappointment in his life had nobody pitched him on a Christian movie at NRB. I had Steve Allen speak at NRB. And we've shown them that they can do better. So, for instance, the biggest movie last year made $2 billion at the box office. That contrasts with the biggest Oscar movie that only made $32 million at the box office. The biggest movie, the producer came up to me, he'd been to the Movie Guide Awards, and said, I'm a Christian. And he introduced me to the director. He's a Christian. And he introduced me to the writer. He's a Christian. And he said, you were the only one who understood that our movie is about the joy of the Lord is our strength. And it's all about joy in this life of this girl who's entering into puberty, and joy taking over from anxiety and helping her to love others and love herself, which is a tremendous movie. And the second biggest movie was $1 billion, and that was based on The Pilgrim's Progress. So the biggest movies every year are that. And then Dune, my friend of mine produced Dune, and he puts in lines like the father saying, if you don't want to be the Duke, I'm happy with whatever you do because I love you. I'm your father. These movies have intentionally come to us and asked for our advice. The head of a studio took me to lunch right after the Movie Guide Awards and asked for our advice because they need to reach this big audience. They got to pay a lot of people. And the way to do that, 116 million people go to church every week. Now, 20 years ago, it was about almost close to 300 million went to church every week, 260 million. But, there's been this downplay, and friends of mine like George Barna say this is terrible. It's condensed, but it's still bigger. The movie industry is only about 11 million, 8 to 11 million every week. So the church is much bigger than the movie industry. And what we tell them is that they reach different audiences. My wife was Argentine. They want to reach, the Spanish speaking audience. They want to reach the Korean speaking audience. We say, this is the Christian audience. If you want to reach it, we'll show you how to do that. And then they come to us and ask us. Just now, the head of Disney's friend just sent me a script to see whether it was going to reach the Christian audience. So today, so every day.
That's great. Do you think there will ever again be a golden era in movie making?
I think all things are possible with God. And I think God is on the move. And just like the line from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which I was head of the company that produced the first version. And if it does, if it doesn't come down to that, if God decides not to do that, movies are aimed at different audiences, as I just said. It's just like car companies. They produce convertibles for young men who want to go pick up girls. They produce sports cars. They produce vans and station wagons for family with kids, all of that. So movies do the same thing. And all we've done with the movie industry, we haven't pushed it over the edge of saying you got to make all the movies like this, is show them, why don't you make movies for this gigantic audience? It's bigger than the African American audience. It's bigger than the Korean audience. And they're getting that. They're getting that point. And every time they make a mistake by trying to do a liberal movie or trying to do a movie with offensive content, it fails at the box office.
What do you hope the reader takes away from your book? It's not just a story about your father. What do you believe it's really about?
Well, people are infatuated with Hollywood. Hollywood is a big audience. That's why Movie Guide gets millions and millions of people coming to it. And that's why you're going to get a lot of people coming to this podcast. People love movies and entertainment. Probably too much, Steve. If I had to advise them, I'd say put down the movies and read some of Steve's book and move in a different direction.
And read your, how many books did you say you've written? 70?
I've contributed and written to over 77 books. So anyway, and I'm doing another one on miracles, which you've done. So I'm, this book is an instructive story about the true story of Hollywood. People always want to see behind the curtain, behind the scenes. They want to see what's going on. And there's a lot of, fallacious. There's a television program now called The Studio, which is a lot of silliness. It's not true. And there was a whole making of The Godfather. It was not true because I knew the people who made The Godfather. I knew the head of Paramount and all those people and the owner of Paramount. So this is the truth. What is Hollywood like? And for people who are interested in getting in the industry, and we have a flood of kids getting in, it shows you the pitfalls. It shows you the problem. It shows you that fame is fleeting. And it shows you also the good side, that how you can have faith and be an overcomer in the midst of all the problems that you see.
Well, that's exciting. How can tell people again how they can get a copy of the book and how they connect with you and to support your mission through Movie Guide?
The best way, you can go to Amazon, of course. But if you want to get the free gift, go to movieguide.org, MOVIEGUIDE, one word, movieguide.org. You can get a hold of me there. There's a link to get a hold of me. There's also a link to buy the book. And when you buy the book right now, at this moment, don't wait, you will get a gift that we'll give you, which I hope you love. I think it's going to be very exciting. It's a clean, wonderful, uplifting movie from the golden age of Hollywood.
Oh, that's good. And just say a little bit more about Movie Guide and what it's accomplished. We have only 2 or 3 more minutes, but I want people to connect with you and get this very important resource.
Well, Movie Guide is a family guide based on biblical principles. We're open about our Christianity. There are a lot of people that review movies that are woke And they don't tell you they're woke. We tell you we're Christian. We're for families. We're helping you to know the difference between the good and bad. I was on the plane recently coming to Washington. The woman said, "Oh, I love this. This is a place I don't have to see bad films." So if you want to see good films, if you want to see films that are analyzed in terms of the good that's in them, if you want to see films that fit your biblical perspective, you go to movieguide.org, and we have a lot of apps. We have an app for family night movies. Which come out all the time. We have an app for date night movies, clean date night movies, not bad date night movies. We have an app for all sorts of movies, including movies about overcomers. So we're here to help you.
Well, I've always been impressed with your organization. I've even visited it once, as I recall.
Yeah. Thank you.
You hired some of my former staff, so our lives have intertwined in a lot. And
I
I've
hope you don't
always
mind that.
admired how it's grown, especially the last few years. It seems to have really taken off. What do the next 5 or 10 years look like for Movie Guide and your entire organization?
I was just at a meeting. I'm a member of the Producers Guild. It's amazing that they accepted us, my son and I, because they're big name producers. And I used to go there, and people would say to me, "This is the future." They'd say to me, "Oh, what do you do?" "Movie Guide." "What's Movie Guide?" Now, when I go there, I was walking in with my son Robbie, and a producer said to me, "Oh, you do Movie Guide. I heard you speak at the Writers Guild." And then he sat down next to a man and his wife, big producer, and Ron, the head of Ron Howard's company, was there. Some of the biggest companies, and he said, "Oh, I get Movie Guide." I walked out, and they said, "Oh, you do Movie Guide. You're a legend in Hollywood." So Hollywood has gotten the message that if they're going to pay their 61,000 people working at Disney or Warner Brothers, they got to make movies that Christians want to see, because Christians are the biggest audience.
Well, I want to just say how much I appreciate you, and I know so many people in the Christian community appreciate you and the work that you've done. Thank you, and congratulations on the great success you've had. And I hope this book, which is called The Golden Age of Hollywood and Broadway, is a great success, and the people will be interested and share it with others and get the word out. So thank you, and thank you for being on my podcast today. God bless you.
Thank you, Steve. You're one of my favorite people. I pray for you every day. And it's working, because you look much younger than I do. So, that's good.
Well, at least you have a sense of humor.